am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.
Hello there. Price of Reason here with a series review. These days, in what seems like a never-ending flow of mediocre TV series, it's sometimes difficult to find an interesting, high-quality sci-fi escapist program. That's why when a show like Amazon Prime's The Peripheral comes along, I think it's worthy of our attention. After receiving a tip from a viewer of this channel, thanks Brian, I've already watched the first 4 episodes of this show, and since we're exactly midway through the first season, I figured this would be a good time for a mid-season review. The Peripheral is a Ready Player One meets The Matrix type of show that takes place in 2 different timelines simultaneously. Timeline 1 is the year 2032 in a rural town in North Carolina, where on one hand things are looking rather grim, but on the other hand there's still a bit of technology that seems a little more advanced than our time today. The second timeline is the year 2099 in London, where the world seems to be less densely populated and much more technologically advanced than what we know from our own time. Specifically, their use of robots, virtual worlds, and artificial intelligence is much more advanced. In an effort to help their very sick mother, Burton, a former U.S. Marine, secures a contract from a Colombian tech company to play a new virtual reality game and recruits his younger sister Flynne to play it in his place, as she is considered a good gamer. Very quickly, it turns out that this is no ordinary simulation, though. Every time Flynne is logged into the simulation, she actually inhabits a peripheral, which is a robotic body in the future. At first, she's inside a peripheral that looks like her brother, and later on, she's in one that looks like her, where her actions actually influence whatever is happening in the future, and she finds herself in some sticky situations. Flynne eventually links up with Wilf Netherton, who lives in the year 2099, and works with some shady characters of his time. They're trying to find Alita, his sister, who had initially pulled Flynne into the sim, gotten her into some kind of trouble, and disappeared. In 2099, there also seems to be an evil organization led by Cherise, and they seem to want to get rid of Flynne in both 2099 and in 2032, so they recruit people in both timelines to harm her. As a result, her brother Burton recruits his entire former military unit to keep them safe. He also reaches an understanding with some local thugs that have been paid to harm them. In addition, it looks like the 2032 timeline is nearing some type of global apocalypse world event. Also, every time Flynne goes into the virtual world, it seems like she's getting some type of neurological damage. The only real positive achievement until now is that with the help of her futuristic connections and more modern medicine, Flynne is able to cure her mother of her terminal illness. There are obviously a lot more details I could share about the story, but this is the general narrative until now. Let's start with what I liked about the first 4 episodes of The Peripheral. Number 1, the writing. So many shows are content these days with just recycling old ideas and writing lazy crap disguised as sci-fi. It seems like nobody wants to put any actual work into making something that feels fresh and interesting. While I know that the show is based on a book, even so, a lot of planning and effort had to have gone into adapting something like this into a series, and until now, I'm pretty impressed with what I've seen. You could tell that this series isn't a rush job and that actual thought has been put into it, which I like. Number 2, the characters. In the show's first episode, I was worried that the main characters were going to be agenda-driven, that Flynne was going to be a strong woman and Burton was going to be a buffoon of sorts, and some other types of propaganda that we're so used to seeing from Hollywood these days. And just when everything seemed to point in that very direction, my expectations were subverted, and not in a crappy Rian Johnson kind of way, but rather in a good way. Neither Flynne nor Burton are presented as perfect. He's good at combat in the real world, and she's good in virtual reality worlds. They both make mistakes and call each other out on them, but they're both generally good people that also look out for each other. At the end of the day, they both bring something to the table, and they both have moments to shine. It's nice to see a story of siblings with this type of layered relationship. It keeps things interesting and helps build a proper story without being overshadowed by trendy agendas. Number 3, world building. It's not easy to create 2 different futuristic timelines in one show and expect the viewers to understand exactly what's going on, but for the most part, the show manages to do just that. The 2032 timeline takes place in a rural area that looks a bit run down, and it has its own look and feel. 2099 is a futuristic London, and overall, I think that's pretty well done too. You understand how each of these places operate, and you get used to the switching between the times and worlds, which storytelling-wise is no easy feat. Number 4. Visuals. If there's anything that we've learned from shows like Amazon's Rings of Power, it's that expensive VFX and CGI can't substitute good storytelling. But if there is good storytelling already in place, and some VFX are used only when necessary, they can be very effective. I generally like what we've been seeing here. The VFX we see mostly help the story move forward by creating the right atmosphere and tone for the show in all the right places. Number 5. The cast. While I won't say that this is the best cast that I've ever seen, it certainly is decent enough for this specific show. Chloë Grace Moretz is an actress that I've never been particularly fond of prior to this series, but I think she's really stepped up her game for this show. You could tell from the first episode that she's taking the role seriously and doing a pretty good job at it. Jack Reynor is an actor that I wasn't familiar with, but until now, I would say that he's doing a very good job as well. In both cases, in addition to the writing of their characters, both actors are rather likable and bring an on-screen presence that works for a sci-fi escapist show of this nature. Some other positive mentions go to Gary Carr, who plays Wilf Netherton in an acceptable way, J.J. Fields, who plays a decent slippery oligarch, and Louis Herthum, who plays a ruthless local North Carolina thug. Again, none of these performances have necessarily blown me away, but they're not bad either, and they certainly work within the show. As of now, there isn't really much I could say that is overly negative. If I had a few things to mention in this category, it would be, number 1, complex story. While I generally like ambitious storytelling and high concepts, I will say that occasionally I've stopped and rewound a scene to make sure I fully understood all the ins and outs of it. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the show certainly isn't always simple to follow and sometimes requires some deep thought to really absorb. Number 2, not casual viewing. Some shows don't demand too much of their viewers, so they can easily check their DMs, their emails, or phones from time to time while watching them. For example, if you're watching NCIS and you look at your phone for a few minutes without paying attention to the screen and then go back to watching the show, you'll still be able to follow the story because it's very casual viewing that doesn't require much thinking from its viewer. Here, if you look at your phone for a few minutes and then tune back in, you will likely have missed something important. It's not something to put on if you're tired or want something in the background. You need to be awake and focused for this, which isn't a bad thing, but sometimes you have to be in the right state of mind for that. Number 3, sustainability. Now this isn't a negative comment either, but more of a concern. Whenever I see a show with this scope of ambitious sci-fi storytelling, I always have this foreboding feeling that it won't be able to sustain this level of writing over time, and you never want a sci-fi show to dip into farce like the J.J. Abrams show, Lost. Now obviously, showrunners Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy are no bums. They both have a solid track record, especially Jonathan Nolan, who with his brother Christopher Nolan, has been involved in many well-received movies such as Memento, Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and Interstellar. But as much as I enjoyed those films, let's also not forget that Nolan and Joy, the showrunners for The Peripheral, were also the showrunners of Westworld. That show started off brilliantly in its first season, but then fell off a cliff somewhere in the second season. Westworld's overall story took many harsh turns during its run, and what started as an escapist sci-fi show gradually turned into something preachy and weird, ultimately leading to its abrupt cancellation. I sincerely hope that Nolan and Joy have learned some valuable lessons from Westworld's decline and managed to avoid some of those same pitfalls here in The Peripheral. Overall though, until now, my opinion on this show is positive. I enjoyed the first 4 episodes, and I recommend it to people that like science fiction. Based on your responses to this video review, I will consider doing more reviews about The Peripheral moving forward, so let me know what you think in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel, and also clicking on that wonderful notification bell. Thanks for watching, my friends. Thank you, and good day!
I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.